The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the usually placid Powder River into a roaring demon. From my cabin window, I watched the water rise inch by inch, swallowing the banks that marked its normal course. I wasn't concerned. My place sat on higher ground, chosen carefully after I'd seen what spring floods could do to a man's homestead. But the constant drum of water on my tin roof had me restless, pacing like a caged wolf. My name is Thomas Hardin. Most folks who know me, which ain't many, call me Tom. I came to this stretch of Wyoming territory in '78, after too many years pushing cattle and sleeping under stars that no longer offered me comfort. The war had taken something from me that I couldn't name, and the years after hadn't given it back. I was just 17 when I joined up with the Union Army, a farm boy from Ohio who'd never been more than 20 miles from home. By the time I turned 21, I'd seen more death than most men witness in a lifetime. Antietam was the worst. We lost over 2,000 men in a single day, the creek running red with blood by sundown. I can still hear the moans of the wounded, calling out through the night for water, for their mothers, for God. I was one of the lucky ones. A Minié ball grazed my left shoulder, leaving a scar but taking no function. Others weren't so fortunate. When the war ended, I couldn't go back to Ohio. My parents had died from fever while I was fighting, and the farm had been sold to cover their debts. My 2 brothers had moved west already, one to California and one to Colorado. We exchanged letters occasionally, but the war had changed us all in ways that made us strangers to each other. They had wives, children, new lives. I had memories I couldn't share, and nightmares I couldn't explain. So I drifted, hiring on with cattle drives moving north from Texas. For 12 years I lived that life, sleeping on the ground, eating dust and beans, watching the backs of 1,000 steers as they plodded toward railheads in Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming. The work was hard enough to exhaust my body and simple enough not to tax my mind. The men I rode with asked few questions about my past, and I returned the favor. Most had stories they preferred to keep buried. But even that, life began to wear on me. The towns at the end of each drive grew wilder, more desperate. Young gunslingers looking to make a name, gamblers eager to separate a man from his wages, women selling whatever comfort they could offer. I saw too many good men lose themselves in that chaos, or die trying to prove something that didn't need proving. In the spring of '78, I delivered a herd to Cheyenne and decided I was finished. I had enough saved to buy a small spread, and the Powder River country called to me with its open spaces and sparse population. So I staked my claim on this patch of riverland, built my cabin with my own hands, and set about living as I pleased, alone with my thoughts and a few head of cattle to keep me busy. The locals in the nearest settlement, such as it was, soon learned I wasn't one for socializing. I'd ride in every couple months for supplies, exchange the minimum pleasantries required, and head back to my place before anyone could extend an invitation I'd have to refuse. Eventually they stopped offering, which suited me fine. The storekeeper, Whitaker, would have my order ready when I arrived, and Doc Simmons would sell me medicinals for myself and my livestock without unnecessary conversation. Some nights, especially in winter when the wind howled across the plains like a wounded beast, the solitude felt like both blessing and curse. But I'd made my peace with loneliness long before I built my cabin. At least here, the quiet was honest. No one expected me to be whole when I wasn't, to forget what couldn't be forgotten, or to build a future on a foundation still cracked from the past. That morning, in early May of 1883, the rain finally broke. I saddled my gelding, Merlin, and rode out to check my small herd. The cattle had huddled under a stand of cottonwoods, looking miserable but alive. I counted 12, all accounted for. My relief was short-lived when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the rushing water and wind-bent trees. A cry, human, desperate. I turned Merlin toward the river, following that sound. The powder had swollen to twice its normal width, brown and angry, carrying whole trees in its current like they weighed nothing. That's when I saw her. She was clinging to a half-submerged cottonwood that had fallen across part of the river. Only her head and one arm were visible above the churning water. Even from 50 yards, I could see she was weakening. I'm no hero. Never claimed to be, but I spurred Merlin closer, dismounting where the ground began to slope toward the flood. I stripped off my coat and gun belt, hesitating only a moment before removing my boots. They'd only drag me down if I ended up in that current. "Hold on," I shouted, though I doubted she could hear me over the river's roar. The water hit me like a mule kick when I waded in, nearly sweeping my feet from under me before I'd gone 10 steps. The cold stole my breath. By the time I reached chest depth, each step was a battle against the current trying to carry me downstream. I grabbed a floating branch, using it to brace myself as I moved deeper. The woman's eyes found mine, dark, exhausted, but still alive with the will to survive. She was young, maybe 20, with long black hair plastered against her face and neck. Her buckskin dress was torn, revealing deep scratches along her arm. "Take my hand," I called out, stretching toward her. She reached for me, our fingers brushing, then separating as the current pulled at her. I lunged forward, abandoning my branch, and grabbed her wrist. The river immediately seized us both, pulling us downstream. For several terrifying moments, we were at the mercy of the powder. I kept my grip on her with one hand while clawing at passing debris with the other. My shoulder struck something solid, another downed tree, and I managed to hook my arm around a branch. The pain was immediate and fierce, but I held on, pulling her closer until I had an arm around her waist. "Climb," I gasped, helping hoist her onto the trunk. She moved with the last of her strength, collapsing onto the rough bark. I followed, every muscle screaming in protest. We lay there, both breathing hard, as the river raged beneath us. The tree shifted ominously. "We need to move," I said, pointing toward the bank, still 15 feet away. She nodded, understanding if not my words, then my meaning. Together we crawled along the trunk, the woman going first, me following close behind. When we reached the point where the tree's roots had been torn from the earth, leaving a tangle of dirt and stone, she slid down into water shallow enough to stand in. I followed, taking her arm to steady her as we staggered to dry land. We collapsed on the muddy bank. I've never felt ground so sweet beneath me. She was shivering violently, her lips blue with cold. I wasn't much better. "My cabin," I managed, pointing upstream where smoke from my chimney was just visible above the trees. "Can you walk?" She tried to stand but stumbled. Without thinking, I scooped her up. She weighed hardly anything in my arms. Merlin had wandered off, but not far. I whistled for him, and he approached cautiously, eyeing the stranger in my arms. With effort, I managed to drape her across the saddle, then led the horse back to my cabin, one slow step at a time. I built up the fire while she huddled in my only chair, wrapped in my spare blankets. I'd given her my one change of clothes, a flannel shirt and wool trousers that swallowed her small frame. Her own garments hung dripping by the fire. Neither of us had spoken since the river. I heated water and made coffee, setting a steaming cup before her. She took it with trembling hands, nodding her thanks. In the firelight, I could see her more clearly. Her features spoke of one of the Plains tribes, Cheyenne, perhaps, or Lakota. A simple necklace of carved bone hung at her throat. Her eyes, when they met mine, were guarded but not fearful. "You speak English?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Some. I'm Tom Hardin." She touched her chest. "Kimmy Mella." "That's a pretty name," I said, though I had no idea what it meant. "How'd you end up in the river?" She looked into her cup. "Bridge break, many days rain." I nodded. There was a crude bridge about 5 miles upstream, little more than logs lashed together. The floods must have taken it out while she was crossing. "Your people nearby?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Journey to sacred waters. I go ahead. Others follow." I didn't press for more. The tribes kept their sacred sites secret, especially from white men who had a habit of desecrating anything the Indians held dear. It wasn't my business anyway. "You can stay till you're stronger," I offered. "I'll sleep in the lean-to with my gear." "Thank you," she said simply. I fed her a simple meal of beans and salt pork. She ate cautiously at first, then with growing hunger. Afterward, I showed her the bed. Just a rough frame with the corn husk mattress, but better than the floor. I took my bedroll outside to the lean-to where I stored my tack and tools. Despite my exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the river pulling me under. Dawn broke clear and cool. I rose stiff but rested enough, and found Kimimela already awake. She sat on my porch step, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky with colors no artist could capture. She'd changed back into her own clothes, now dry but still bearing the river's damage. "Morning," I said, keeping my distance so as not to startle her. She turned, a small smile touching her lips. "Just Tom is fine," I said, setting about making breakfast. After we'd eaten, I needed to check my cattle again and mend what damage the storm had done to my modest ranch. I hesitated, not wanting to leave her alone if she was still weak. "I have work to do," I said. "You should rest more." She shook her head. "I help." I started to object, then thought better of it. We worked side by side that morning, repairing a section of fence the floodwaters had damaged and gathering scattered firewood. She moved with purpose, no longer showing signs of her ordeal except for the occasional wince when she used her injured arm. She knew ranch work, that much was clear. Around midday, she stopped suddenly, looking toward the north. I followed her gaze but saw nothing. "What is it?" I asked. "They come," she said quietly. I reached instinctively for the rifle I kept strapped to my saddle, but she placed a gentle hand on my arm. "No need," she said. "Friends." Within minutes, I saw them appearing over the ridge, riders on horseback, moving at an unhurried pace. As they drew closer, I counted 5 men in the lead, each dressed differently, their horses adorned with distinct patterns and symbols. Behind them rode perhaps 20 others, men and women both. "Who are they?" I asked, tension building in my chest. I'd had little trouble with the local tribes, but that didn't mean trouble couldn't find me. "Different peoples," she said. "Lakota, Cheyenne, Crow, Arapaho, Shoshone." I stared at her, then back at the approaching riders. These tribes were not always friendly with one another, to put it mildly. Yet here they rode together, approaching my land in formation. The riders stopped at my fence line, about 50 yards from where we stood. One man, older than the rest, with gray braids hanging down his chest, raised his hand in greeting. Kimila stepped forward and called out in a language I didn't understand. The man responded, relief evident in his voice. "We should go to them," she said to me. I hesitated only briefly before nodding. We walked together to the fence, me feeling increasingly aware of my shabby appearance and the curious eyes studying me from atop their horses. The older man spoke in English, his accent thick but words clear. "You saved Kimilela from the river." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Found her holding onto a tree. Anyone would have done the same." A murmur ran through the gathered riders. The old man shook his head slowly. "Not anyone. Not in these times." He gestured to the others with him. "I am Stone Bear of the Lakota. These are leaders of 4 other nations." Each man nodded as Stone Bear introduced them. Running Elk of the Cheyenne, Black Wolf of the Crow, Two Rivers of the Arapaho, and Mountain Heart of the Shoshone. I'd never seen representatives of 5 tribes gathered peacefully in one place, let alone on my doorstep. Kimimela spoke again in her language, gesturing toward me occasionally. The tribal leaders listened intently. When she finished, Stone Bear turned to me. She says you risked your life without hesitation, that you gave her your bed and slept outside, that you asked for nothing in return. I shifted uncomfortably. Like I said, anyone would. No, Stone Bear interrupted firmly. Not anyone. Especially not a white man for one of our women. I had no answer for that. He wasn't wrong. We have brought gifts, Stone Bear continued, motioning to those behind him. Several riders dismounted, bringing forward bundles wrapped in tanned hides and woven blankets. That's not necessary, I began, but Kimimela touched my arm. To refuse is great insult, she whispered. So I stood awkwardly as the gifts were presented. A finely crafted bow from the Crow, a painted buffalo robe from the Cheyenne, beaded moccasins from the Arapaho, a stone pipe from the Lakota, and a beautifully tanned elk hide from the Shoshone. I accepted each with thanks, increasingly bewildered by the ceremony of it all. You honor me, I said when they finished, but I don't understand why. Kimimela is not just any woman, Stone Bear explained. She is Wakan Waikapi. I looked to her for translation. Her eyes met mine steadily. It means holy star, she said softly. I was born when the stars fell from sky. Many tribes saw same sign. Stone Bear nodded. 20 summers ago, the stars rained down for one night. In all our tribes, only one child was born at that exact moment, Kimimela. Our holy men saw this as a powerful sign. As she grew, they watched her closely and saw she had a gift for bringing peace. Running Elk, the Cheyenne leader, spoke next. For many seasons our peoples fought each other, and the white man, blood soaked into the earth, that should grow food for our children. 3 summers ago, continued Black Wolf of the Crow, Kimimela began to travel between our tribes, carrying messages of peace. She goes where men cannot go without being killed. She speaks words that would not be heard from a warrior's mouth. She is sacred to us all, added Two Rivers. When she disappeared in the storm, we feared the worst. 5 tribes searched together, following the river. Mountain Heart, who had been silent until now, fixed me with an intense gaze. You did not just save one woman, Thomas Hardin, you saved the peace between our peoples. I looked at Kimimela with new understanding. The quiet dignity I'd sensed in her had deeper roots than I'd imagined. She met my gaze without pride or pretense, just a simple acknowledgement of her unusual role. Will you allow us to make camp on your land tonight? Stone Bear asked. We wish to give thanks properly, and Kimimela should rest before continuing her journey. I nodded, still processing everything I'd learned. Of course, there's good water in the creek just beyond those trees, and plenty of flat ground. As the riders moved off to make camp, Kimimela stayed behind with me. We walked back toward my cabin in silence. Finally, I found my voice. You might have mentioned you were some kind of holy person. A small smile touched her lips. Would it have changed how you pulled me from river? I considered this, then shook my head. No, I suppose not. Then it was not important in that moment. Her simple logic was hard to argue with. That evening, my humble ranch hosted a gathering unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. 5 tribes, traditional enemies in many cases, sat together around shared fires. They ate, sang songs in their various languages, and told stories that were translated among them. I sat somewhat apart, still processing the strangeness of it all, until Stone Bear motioned me to join the circle of leaders. As I sat, Mountain Heart passed me the stone pipe that had been given as a gift. It had been lit and passed around the circle already. You need not smoke if you do not wish, he said, but we would be honored if you joined our council tonight. I took the pipe and drew from it carefully. The smoke was different from tobacco, sweeter, more aromatic. I passed it on to 2 rivers beside me. Thomas Harden, Stone Bear, began. We have discussed among ourselves how to honor the man who saved our holy star. We wish to give you a name among our peoples. This caught me by surprise. A name? Black Wolf nodded. A name that will be known to all our tribes, so that if you ever travel in our lands or need help from our people, you will be recognized as a friend. The gravity of this gesture wasn't lost on me. In a territory where relations between whites and Indians remained tense at best, they were offering me a rare protection. I would be honored, I said sincerely. Kimimela, who sat across the circle, spoke in her language. The leaders nodded in agreement. She suggests man who walks into river, translated Stone Bear. It is a good name, strong and true to what you did. The ceremony followed, with each tribal leader speaking words in their own language, acknowledging the new name. I sat in humble silence, aware that I was witnessing something few white men ever had, genuine acceptance, however limited, into their circle. Later, as the gathering continued around smaller fires, Kimimela joined me where I sat on my cabin's porch steps. Your journey, I said. The sacred waters you mentioned. Where are you bound? She looked up at the star-filled sky. Hot springs in mountains, place where Earth's blood rises to heal. I carry message from all tribes to spirits there. Asking for something, asking for rain to end. For good hunting, for children to grow strong. She paused. For peace to last between our peoples and yours. I nodded, understanding the weight of her mission. Will you return this way? Perhaps, she said, but I heard the polite evasion in her voice. Her path would take her wherever she was needed, not back to a solitary rancher who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. They departed the next morning, leaving my quiet ranch feeling strangely empty. Kimimela came to say goodbye last, after the others had mounted up. Your arm, I said, noticing the fresh bandage one of the tribal healers had applied. It will heal well. Yes, she smiled. All wounds heal with time. I wasn't sure if she meant just her arm or something deeper. Man who walks into river, she said, using my new name with a gentle formality. And I'll remember the holy star who fell into my river, I replied. She reached up then, removing the bone necklace she wore. Before I could object, she placed it over my head. So you remember, she said simply, that even one person can turn a river. I watched them ride away, 5 tribes moving together across the plains until they disappeared over the ridge. The bone necklace felt warm against my chest. That evening, I sat alone on my porch as the sun set, turning the sky the color of embers. My solitude, which had been a comfort for so many years, felt different now, not broken, exactly, but expanded somehow, as if it now held space for something more than just my own thoughts and regrets. I never saw Kimimela again, though I heard stories over the years of a woman who traveled between tribes, bringing messages of peace, of councils, where traditional enemies sat together and shared the pipe, of treaties made without the white man's involvement that nevertheless held strong. Sometimes traders or travelers would stop at my ranch, and occasionally one would notice the bone necklace I still wore. Their eyes would widen slightly, and their manner would change, becoming more respectful, more open. Once, a young Cheyenne man asked directly, "You are man who walks into river?" When I acknowledged that I was, he clasped my hand firmly. My father was at the council on your land. He has told me the story many times. These moments always left me feeling both honored and humbled. I had done only what any decent man should do, reached out a hand to someone in need. That my simple act had rippled outward in ways I could never have imagined seemed a kind of miracle, though not the mystical sort. Rather, it was the everyday miracle of human connection across the boundaries that so often divide us. I remain on my ranch by the Powder River, still preferring my own company most days. but I no longer think of myself as separate from the larger world around me. The river taught me that we are all connected in its flow, and sometimes the current brings unexpected gifts to those willing to reach into the churning waters. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the western sky burns with colors no painter could capture, I think about the path that led me here, how a frightened farm boy from Ohio became a soldier, then a drifter, then a man who chose solitude over the comfort of others. I wonder what might have happened if I'd made different choices, returned to Ohio despite my ghosts, joined my brothers in their new lives, or perhaps found a woman willing to bear my silence and my nightmares. But then I touch the bone necklace at my throat and remember Kim Inella's words, "All wounds heal with time. Some heal cleaner than others, leaving scars that fade but never disappear completely." The war left its mark on me, as surely as the river carved this valley. Yet the same forces that wound can also, in time, bring healing. My solitude is no longer a fortress I've built against the world. Instead, it's become a quiet harbor from which I occasionally venture out, more willing than before to let others glimpse the man behind the weathered face. I'll never be one for crowds or long conversations, but I've found a measure of peace in my simple life that once seemed impossible. And perhaps that's enough for one lifetime to save rather than destroy, to build rather than burn, to reach into raging waters and pull someone toward shore. Not because you're brave or special, but because in that moment, it's the only thing a man can do and still call himself human.